Thank you for joining us for the 6th Ocean Nexus webinar. This event is supported by Nippon Foundation and the International Philanthropic Organization. Thank you, Nippon Foundation. And it is presented by Ocean Nexus. Ocean Nexus is a research network of scholars whose mission is to establish social equity at the center of ocean governance. So Ocean Nexus is to establish social equity at the center of ocean governance. Hopefully you can join this conversation. So my name is Yoshitaka Ota, Yoshi Ota. I'm the director of Ocean Nexus, and I am a professor at the Department of Marine Affairs in the University of Rhode Island. I recently moved. Formerly, I was in the University of Washington. Today's webinar, as I said, Ocean Literacies, not Ocean Literacy, Cognitive Equity and Children's Rights in the UN Ocean Decade of Science. It is part of the Ocean Equity Learning Forum webinar series, and we kind of like put this ocean literacy theme in the research under the research theme of Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I would like to introduce our two speakers. Our first speaker, Dr. Mia Strand, is an Ocean Nexus postdoctoral research fellow based at the Institute for Coastal and Marine Research at Nelson Mandela University in partnership with One Ocean Hub, which is also a research network. I hope I see some people from One Ocean Hub. If not, please listen to the recordings. And Dr. Strand's research focuses on cognitive equity in marine science, or cognitive justice in marine science, reimagining ocean literacies as a process that recognizes a plurality of ocean knowledges. So the plurality of ocean knowledges. Sorry about my pronunciation, but you get the message. Dr. Strand explored the knowledge co-production processes using art-based participatory research method in her PhD, and has formerly worked in international development and NGO sectors with ocean conservation, youth engagement, gender, and human rights projects. I'm delighted Dr. Strand is going to speak and talk to us about ocean literacies. Our second speaker, Dr. Jacqueline Uku, is a seagrass scientist and conservation leader based at Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute in Mombasa, Kenya. I visited Mombasa 30-some years ago. It's amazing to have you here, Dr. Uku. She has contributed to the development of national environmental policy, being a member under the African Women Agricultural Research and Development Program, serves as a technical member of a National Blue Economy Technical Committee, and was the outgoing president of Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association. Dr. Uku is also the national coordinator for marine spatial planning in Kenya and has recently been elected as the chair of the Africa Ocean Decade Task Force. And then more than this, I must say, Dr. Uku speaks both as a scientist and as through her experience and an identity, which I enjoyed listening in some of the YouTube. So it's just a delight, for us to have you here. Thank you very much. So first, I'm going to pass floor to Dr. Strand, who's going to give a presentation, and I'm going to ask a few questions to Dr. Uku to respond, and then we have a discussion. Then you have a Q&A. During the talk and during the discussion, please put your question Q&A at the webinar Q&A. So we pick up the questions and we'll ask to the presenters. Okay, thank you very much, all the audiences from everywhere in the world, and I'll pass the mic to you, Dr. Strand.
Thank you so much, Yoshi. And please do let me know if I break up, because my connection is apparently very I kicked out. So fingers crossed.
Mia, you're breaking up.
Part of cognitive equity is also about connectivity and how. So I'm trying to.
Mia, Dr. Strand,
Yeah,
you're breaking up.
okay?
Yeah, no, actually, you're breaking up for what, like a 3 minutes. Can you just start from the beginning? We have a time.
Okay, let me just change my.
Okay.
All right, let me try to share my screen again. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly okay.
Perfect. Fabulous. All right.
Thank you for making effort for that.
No, of course, it is part of the process. Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, please do stop me again or write in the chat. I should get a notification. I will talk slowly, even though I am trying to cover a lot of topics. For those of you who don't know, a very common understanding of ocean literacy is knowing and understanding the ocean influence on us and our influence on the ocean. And just something to keep in mind as I go through this short presentation. So what my focus is on is cognitive equity. And cognitive equity is really looking at how different knowledge systems are being valued or not valued, recognized in a space. And so I borrow from De Sousa Santos, it's the equity between different ways of knowing and different kinds of knowledge. So it's not about equality and therefore recognizing various ways of knowing the ocean on an equal level, but it's actually given preferential or promotional attention and recognition of knowledges that have been marginalized, silenced, or discriminated against in the past. And so what we want to reach is an ecology of knowledges, or what can be called cognitive justice, where we actually see that we recognize a plurality or pluriversality of knowledge systems. And that can be adapted from the Zapatista movement, which has been translated by Mignolo and others as a world in which many worlds can coexist, or an ocean in which many oceans coexist. So thinking about what then cognitive ocean equity is, I think about it as the then active elevation, recognition, appreciation of ocean knowledges that have been or are currently marginalized, silenced, or discredited, whether that is in marine science, ocean governance, or ocean literacies. Then coming to the aspect of children's rights to a healthy ocean, which also is often related to a healthy environment. And we know that, children's rights to life, to food, to health, survival, all of these aspects are interlinked with a healthy ocean. But what is often not focused on as much is children's rights to development, which we focus on as a more holistic understanding, looking at children's rights to spiritual, psychological, social development as well. And we also recognize that children's rights to culture is highly interdependent on a healthy ocean as well, especially if you look at a context like South Africa, where spiritual connections to the ocean are highly dependent on a healthy ocean, for example. And it also is linked to customary practices, to heritage and identities. So we've actually explored a bit of this before with Ocean Hub colleagues. And this is where we argue also that, a healthy ocean, development, and culture are all interlinked, like parts of well-being would be linked to having fun, for example, or knowledge is linked to education. So we're also saying that this is all interdependent, just like socio-ecological systems, thinking in the marine space. So just something to think about in terms of when we come back to why we should think about a plurality of ocean knowledges. So if we then come back to this understanding of ocean literacy, if we're thinking about all the various influences the ocean has on us and all the various influences we have on the ocean, it is not just the biophysical, not just the direct food or well-being, is actually the cultural, the spiritual, and aspects of mental well-being. So some of the aspects that we see in terms of existing cognitive inequity is that a lot of people are already criticizing ocean literacy as a concept or as a process of being didactic, positivistic, thinking it's an either or, quite marine science heavy and dominated by biophysical dimensions and ecology from a Western academic standpoint. And this is also something that is recognized by UNESCO, emphasizing that they're hoping that part of the ocean literacy definition and concepts are adapted and developed to making it relevant in the local spaces that might not be one size fits all, if that makes sense. So this brings us to our argument, thinking that we should be talking about ocean literacies, embracing a plurality of ways of knowing, ways of connecting to, experiencing the ocean. This speaks to really recognizing and emphasizing place-based, embodied relationships with the ocean. And part of this work is really reviewing how existing programs or projects can actually embrace a more holistic, pluralistic, a lot of buzzwords, but approaches to ocean literacies. And part of this work, which is also what I look at, is reflecting on how social cultural dimensions can form part of ocean literacies work. So we've already, in our quite theoretical work, outlined some opportunities, and we've looked at the opportunity of using different forms of knowledge sharing, but also learning from existing ocean knowledges and stewardship connections. And that's really where I think we have such a great opportunity, and also highlighting dimensions that are already there, and thinking about how people learn, how people understand, connect to a place. So think about vernacular access, local languages and concepts, and contextual knowledge systems. And therefore, there's opportunities of co-developing this, not just with local knowledge holders, but also with children, to understand what children already know or what they want to know. However, there's also challenges, and I'm sure we'll discuss that today. First of all, that there are cognitive inequities, not just in this space, but in marine science as a whole, and in ocean governance, which really is promoting and pursuing some often positivistic as well, marine science heavy solutions to ocean decision-making processes, for example. And what is often brought up is that this takes time. One size fits all, or adapting, contextualizing approaches take dedicated champions, takes resources. And we're seeing that social cultural dimensions, but also holistic systems approaches are even lacking in marine science and in ocean governance processes. And finally, one thing I want to highlight, because it's something that keeps coming up in conversations here in South Africa, is how do we also reach children living inland? And I know more and more work are being put into the digital twin of the ocean, for example. But again, that is often also quite biophysical or ecology focused, not necessarily looking at very contextual knowledge systems or spiritual connections to the ocean, for example. So that's also something to think about. So I guess I'm bringing more questions and thoughts than solutions. But I just wanted to highlight some of the work that we're doing, that I have been doing with the One Ocean Hub, and also trying to do through my postdoctoral research fellowship at the moment. So thank you so much for listening. I hope it wasn't a pain and that my internet wasn't breaking up too much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Strand. So I'm going to turn into Dr. Uku. And Dr. Uku, I wanted to do more like a conversational to some extent, and then I want to bring Dr. Strand as we talk. But first, perhaps you could just explain what's the overview, or give us the overview of ocean literacy process or literacies process regionally, and also some of the key principles that you're following with ocean literacy. Can you just explain to us briefly about this so people do understand what is actually be taken into place both regionally and perhaps connected to the globally?
Thank you, Yoshi. I'm very happy to be here. I hope I can be heard well. Thank you. Ocean literacy has had a journey. I come from a region or the Western Indian Ocean region, which is in Africa. And for us, we still grapple with the fact that we have a word as ocean literacy, because we're still looking for a term that we can domesticate to be our term for the knowledge of the ocean. For the simple reason that when we say that we are ocean illiterate, when we talk about literacy, we're basically saying, hey, we are illiterate, which may not be the case. However, we recognize, and I recognize, that we had to start this journey somewhere. And this is the term that has been available. It's a term that we will continue to apply until we get a new term. And historically, ocean literacy started with the science. And so we've picked it up as scientists. I'm a scientist by profession. And so I've anchored it in my science. But I'll elaborate a bit more about how I've done that as I look at the principles that we anchor ocean literacy into, and the recognition that many regions are ocean blind. Many countries have their backs turned to the ocean. Our capital cities, like for us in Kenya, is inland, far from the ocean. So when people come to the ocean, they see the vastness of the ocean, but very little about what happens underneath. So historically, I would say that ocean literacy or work on understanding the ocean and bringing the knowledge forward started out in the US. And it was really based on ocean science, embedding science into the curricula and using the scientific lens. This has moved, and we now have global networks all over the world that are looking at ocean literacy through different lenses. So not only the lens of science, but we are looking at creative arts, looking at exploring it to see, and I know Mia has done a lot of this, aspects of spirituality, culture, arts. So arts being creative arts, when we break it down, it's visual arts, it's music, it's theater. And trying to help people see beyond just the top, but to the bottom. In terms of ocean literacy, I belong to the Ocean Literacy Expert Group under IOC UNESCO, and we uphold 7 principles of ocean literacy. And the first one is the Earth has one big ocean with many features. Not many people know that we have different oceans, and many of us do not still understand that. So that is, when you unpack that, it becomes, a tool to help people understand that the Earth is surrounded, and nations are surrounded by oceans, continent is surrounded by the ocean. The ocean and its life shape the features of the Earth. So the ocean and its life, they shape Earth, they give us life, oxygen. The ocean is a major influence on weather and climate. Not many people know that. Not many people know that our rain in our region comes from the ocean. And when there are changes in dynamics because of climate change, that impacts the rain. It impacts our crop production. So the oceans impact us more than we know, and not many people know that. The ocean makes the Earth habitable. That's another principle. The 5th principle is the ocean supports great diversity of life and ecosystems. And this showcases all the biodiversity focus and the ecosystems. The other principle is that the oceans are interconnected. And the last one is that the ocean is largely unexplored. We know very little about the ocean in its entirety. And these principles have helped us shape the discourse around ocean knowledge. And many of us then use these principles to try to elaborate the knowledge that we require to make our people, our nations face the sea. So we recognize the fact that, and maybe to go back where I started, that although we have these principles, they need to be mainstreamed, domesticated, and understood within the nations of the world. And some ways is trying to look for things that can resonate with us. So I ask, when I ask people, you know, when you see a lion on land, what does it make you feel in your heart, in your spirit? When you see an elephant, what does that make you feel? Can you imagine if you saw a whale, a dolphin, how would that make you feel? And so I'll just, if you'll allow me, I will just give you a process that I've been going through recently. And in the last few years, 2-3 years, I began to look at the ocean through the lens of art, and did a survey in 2 coastal cities in Kenya to see how much art reflected the ocean. And to my surprise and the surprise of our team, 90% of the art was terrestrial. Elephants, lions, zebras, bats, rivers, Mount Kenya. Everything is in the art that we see on the ocean front. The artists are drawing what, and the artists told us, you know, we draw what people want to buy. And for us, we were able to infer that, yes, we've done very well selling the conservation message for the terrestrial animals, but very little in selling the conservation message for the ocean, because very few of the artwork was of sea creatures. We saw very few fish, very few billfish, very few whales, a few boats, sailboats, but very few ocean art pieces. And we've been having this discourse with artists to find out how can we propel a bit further. And it's not easy. And so when Mia talks about ocean literacies, then you find it may not just be the literacy that we know that is anchored on science. It may be the literacy that comes from different fields that we need to pull into this journey, the theater, the music, so that we begin to touch people's hearts and turn them towards the ocean.
Dr. Uku, thank you so much. That's quite inspiring. And it's really, it's sort of like bringing me back to maybe like 20 years ago when US started using this term ocean literacy. It was a part of education, and it was part of giving a message to we need to enhance ocean science. But at the same time, like you said, it actually came and it almost treated ocean as separate from the society, and in some ways, ocean science as the kind of like a vehicle for me to, in some ways, stop the conversation about the history of the oceans and knowledge of the oceans, which is completely plural, and some are very, very painful. And so, Mia, would you just turn the camera on, please? Dr. Strand, I'm so sorry. You're part of the conversation. So I want to turn back to you and, you know, responding to Dr. Uku's, you know, the work and then thinking and, you know, bringing into the art. Okay, so you working on cognitive equity by bringing into the art, you know, what are the cognitive equity we're trying to just reach out to it? You know, what is the need that we need to, that is a need we have to fulfill. We have to consider the change. I was very inspired, Dr. Uku, start talking about illiterate. You know, that's exactly the message that I fear, and I actually have, you know, wanted to resist. When people say the literacy, they're bound to be people who illiterate. So they actually create this boundary between those who know, those who don't know. And then that's not really true. So I'm going to pass it to you. How does it work for the cognitive equity?
Well, I think it's kind of where I've been wanting to go into this line of work, because my PhD was really looking at using arts to not just communicate knowledge, but also to bring people together across different knowledge systems. And I think I would be so interested, Jacqueline, because I think it sounds like such an incredible project, trying to look at what art is there and what is being communicated or what is not being there. Because I think part of, if we look at cognitive equity as a very broad concept or idea, part of it is arguing that not everyone learns best, communicates best, knows best through wording, right? So literacy, if we talk about literacy or illiteracy, and I think that is where there's so great opportunity maybe, and maybe where even literacies is actually still wrong, right? It's still kind of capturing inequity in the way we are thinking about conceptualizing ocean knowledge or ocean connections, because so much of emotion, like I love what you were saying, Jacqueline, in terms of what does this make you feel, right? Seeing this, what does this make you feel? And I think for so many people, including myself, I react very differently if I see something in person versus seeing something on screen versus reading something. It's also the distance that might be in between you, and also what languages it is in, who it is communicated by. So I think a lot of these dimensions, a lot of the opportunities maybe to think to the literacies, or let's scrap literacy completely, but is to explore the opportunities that art, theater, music, and more creative processes can give us. And that is, you mentioned something, Yoshi, because I think so much is also already there. And I think a lot of really exciting work is being done in the environmental humanities, for example, to look at how the deep sea has been portrayed through music or through videography or through film, and to think about actually a lot of the stories, intertwining different stories and the different ways of understanding or connecting to, or even having fear for a place, have already been communicated, maybe through different mediums and not through peer-reviewed journal articles or through written word. Sorry, I was trying to respond to all of what you were saying.
No, thank you. So, I think it's very important to just express the feeling, and sometimes, such as science, it's not really the right vehicle. I mean, art has much more capacity to just encapsulate, what you're feeling, like exactly what you said, Dr. Uku. But at the same time, some might argue, so can I just be devil's advocate? Some might argue and then coming to you and they say, like, but look, if you want to conserve, if you want to, so like, we need to adapt to the climate change, it's urgent, if we need to conserve, we also have to make some money out of the ocean, that sort of thing, and we have to do it, manage and all this. What we need is a data and model, so we can understand what the ocean is going to be in and all this. Arts, theater, inspiring, but first has to be data and a model. I don't really like this opinion, but Dr. Uku, would you enlighten us? Things are not always like that. Or you might agree, what they said, model and the data first. What do you think?
Thank you for that question. And to answer, I'll begin by pointing out to the Venice Declaration that we developed as an ocean literacy expert group that talks about ocean literacy in action. So looking at the actions, looking at livelihood of our planet, emphasizing fun and recreation from the ocean, connectivity of the ocean and the spiritual dimensions. But one thing I know, having been a scientist and dedicated over 30 years of my life to science, is data is important. Data is critical. We won't know how to respond if we have not modeled, if we've not done the investigation. So I still believe that, especially in this decade of ocean science, for all nations, we have to pull out the the data. We have to pull out the science and we have to collaborate. But, and I'll also indicate that my study was a scientific study. If it was not for that study, I needed the data to be able to speak about it. I needed to draw some graphs, because then nobody would have believed me. It's very hard to stand up without some data to say anything. So I needed the data, and I did a whole study and published a paper on that topic. The paper can be found on the WIOMSA journal. So if you type WIOMSA, and which is the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association, we have a journal. And in that journal, if you type art and science, you will probably find the paper, but I can send you a link, Yoshi, to share with the audience later. So I needed the data. So I had to revert to science. I had to revert to the numbers to actually quantify how much was I seeing. So to be able to say 90%, this came from data, this came from science. But what I have recognized is it can't be science alone. There needs to be the aspect of communication. And communication is another science. There has to be also the science of behavior change communication. It can't just be me standing and saying, this is what we found, but there has to be a different science, a different way to be able to showcase the research work, the results, so that people can actually pick it up. We've tried to use drama for that, theater, to actually showcase the results of our study. And if that production is done, I'll share it with you and your team. And also artists to begin to draw the findings of these things. So I think the science is, in as much as it's difficult, I think it is really the foundation before we can lift off. And the science can be different types of science. It's I did mine with the lens of the science we know, where you take measurements and counts, quantitative, but there's also the qualitative, the social studies that are very important, the narratives that we need to document, especially the narratives of those that we are losing, because we have a generational turnover. And that too, I believe, is a science. So it may not be easy, but I still believe that we have to have the foundation to be able to propel and push ourselves forward.
Thank you so much. That's kind of like explains, okay, you're a scientist. So naturally, if I may say, you're trying to intersect between what the science and then data actually reveals and how you interpret what it reveals. So, it depends how you interpret it. It's really also can be expressed and explained through the different medium. Now, coming back to children's rights, Mia. So through the educations, the cognitive justice is extremely important, because some people don't really learn from data and the modeling, and then it's not really always revealing, but they actually do have a different way of understanding what the ocean and what the nature revealed to. So Mia, can you just elaborate a little bit? Okay, something like what Dr. Uku said, okay, science will be a foundation, but yet in education, in respect of the children's rights, their access to the ocean, how you see this ocean literacies can actually be evolved, both regionally and globally. Big question, but you have a time.
Big question, big question. Yeah, I think part of this brings us back to what we were speaking about before, and really thinking about what Jacqueline was also saying in terms of we have to start somewhere. And I do think that a lot of the brilliant programs and processes that are happening through education, particularly in South Africa and globally, are so crucial just for us to understand how we are interconnected and interdependent with the ocean. But I think part of that process, if we are going to look at a more holistic approach to children's rights and also to cognitive equity, if we bring that back, I think we have an opportunity and even sometimes the responsibility to think about how we can reach, if we're looking at children, you know, it doesn't have to be children, it can be also anyone, but to reach even further, we should use all the means we have possible. And I think here's again bringing in the arts. I am biased, but I think the way that we connect with the arts, and now that's also a big term, it also is how it makes us feel. So I think thinking about how we are maybe moved, or we perceive something, or we really, really connect with something that we might not even know about before, can really shift the way we kind of behave, but also shift the way that we see the world around us and perceive it. And I think part of what we are currently missing a bit is also recognizing how children are already perceiving or connected to the ocean, or perceiving and thinking about how they might have learned or been taught about the ocean or the world around them through generational knowledge, through indigenous knowledge systems, through practice, by going, or if they haven't seen the ocean, maybe seeing it on TV or hearing about it in stories or folklore or myths. And I think we have an opportunity to see a more holistic picture of what and how the ocean plays such a big role in our lives, kind of also culturally and in our development and in our well-being, and in social cultural dimensions. So yeah, I just think there's opportunities there, similarly to thinking about how the arts can actually move us to make different decisions or to think differently. Sometimes, you know, I completely agree with Jacqueline that we need the data, we need the science, but sometimes that isn't enough. Sometimes we also need the stories and the narratives to reach more people, or to also communicate aspects that can't fit in a graph, or that can't fit on a piece of paper, or in English, for example. So really adapting it according to language and place. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mia. Thank you, Dr. Uku. I'm going to now invite those audience and read out some of the questions. But before that, I just wanted to mention, because we're working on the equity, you know, I also recognize a lot of kids, a lot of people, both in urban, both coastal, have a very limited access, almost no access at all. In the United States, a lot of kids working in agricultural place, you know, just off the street, a mile or two from the coast, and then never been to the ocean. And then that's really the reality. Sometimes we just face to it. And I actually hesitate to say, you know, some of those digital solutions and all that, it just doesn't really think the best way to forward is to take them to the coast, you know? And I think that's still the conversation part of the ocean education, and then what we need to really work on. So anyway, so I'm sorry, I just took my imperative. So I'm gonna read it out, and I'm sorry about my pronunciation, but you guys don't mind, for the questions and the comments. So the Emma McKinley, I hope I pronounced your name okay, Emma. It's the concept of ocean literacy has undergone. So she just organized this session in IMCC, and they reviewed those 7 principles, and they just wonder, okay, what's missing from those 7 principles? Is that okay, Emma? So I just wonder if you guys have any opinion, you know, what could potentially missing from those, thank you, those 7 principles. Dr. Uku or Dr. Strand, either of you, what do you think? If you can actually add 1 or 2 things on those 7 principles, what would you put?
The one thing I see when I look at the principles is they're very broad and talk to the physical environment. So it talks about the ocean, the earth, the interconnectivity, the ecosystems. And we don't have a principle that talks about people. That would be my take. And, you know, these are the, they're very valuable discussions. So thank you, Emma, for that question. We may need to begin to think, can we put a principle that looks at people? And I think the Venice Declaration has provided a bit of a road towards that by connecting ocean, land, man, and spiritual dimensions, as well as calling it to action. I think these are the small elements and small steps that can help us begin to look for wording that incorporates us in that picture, because we are part of this living system.
Thank you. Dr. Strand?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I completely agree. I think another aspect is maybe recognizing the history and the histories of the ocean's influence on us and our influence on the ocean. I think maybe looking a bit about how the ocean has and continue to be explored and how that has been linked with colonialism, imperialism, and even to this day is very skewed in terms of who has access to ocean observation processes, or who has had a say in how we kind of look at or explore or observe the ocean. I think that is also something to really recognize the history and its impact on the current situation.
Thank you very much. Dr. Gerald Singh asking, okay, if there is, in the context of decision-making, if there is kind of like a disagreement between different knowledge, do you know any way, and then knowing apart disparities, do you know any space where this knowledge plurality actually resolved with a disagreement, or would you actually consider if something we need to explore? I mean, do you have any idea?
I give this a lot of thought in my own work in exploring opportunities for knowledge co-production, and I think that we often in knowledge co-production or bringing together various knowledge systems, we think about equality rather than equity. So it's all about bringing people to the same table, not necessarily looking at how we need to do a 70-30 split to get to an even opportunity of equality. So I do think, I can't think of any interventions at the moment, except from actually giving more votes, for example, as a very like a democratic example, but giving more votes to an area that hasn't had as much influence in a political sphere, for example, or in a political process. So actually making sure that people who have had less say in the past get an extra say now until we get to a point where we can even think about equity or equality. So I think that is, of course, using processes from democratic thinking processes, but I would love to hear more if you have some more ideas.
I mean, I suppose showing what you said just about the history, showing what we have been done, what has been done for a long time under the rigorous science, and then potentially some of the projections has not really been worked at all. And now we are facing climate change. So we might need to consider, you know, what are the other ways of doing it. Recently, I heard in some open session for Fisheries Council over here, some people talking about like, okay, science has been telling us it's okay with the fish stock, but it's not. And our elders been talking about like, it's going down, but we got to do something about it. Why didn't we hear from them? Why didn't we listen to them about like 30, 40 years, what's wrong with this? Not giving them a seat in our council. So that was kind of a conversation. It was interesting. Anyway, sorry. Okay. Right. Dr. Uku, there is a question to you. What framework exists or need to be developed for effectively integrating art into scientific research program? You talked a few of those. If you can just give us like a, you know, one more example, and how can citizen science project and design to be both enhance ocean literacy? This is really big. So you could either give us like, you know, the example, or you can just lead us to, okay, why don't you go and look at some of the projects you have done? That would be good.
Sorry.
No.
It's very hard to say whether that we have a framework, because we're just starting this interrogation, at least from my end. I know that there have been ocean practitioners that have had a great deal more experience in using the arts for ocean expression. But I think it's something we can begin to discuss from this forum together to see how do we create processes and guidance to be able to propel. One thing I would say is that we're always talking about co-creation. This is big in many of the work, in a lot of the work we do, but we have to recognize that, and at least from experience, we talk different languages. It's really hard co-create. You have with artists, you have to start by building trust, and building trust can take a year. It's not something that happens in a twinkling of the eye. You have to spend time understanding copyright issues, intellectual property issues, agreements on how you will co-create for a purpose. So there's a lot of elements that would come into a framework. And it would, in my opinion, it needs greater thinking. Yeah. But maybe Mia has other thoughts around it.
No,
Great.
I think you're right. Oh, sorry.
No, please.
No, I think you're right. And I think, like you're saying, it takes time to build trust and to start even thinking about how we might speak in different languages, different point of views, different experiences, and how we might conceptualize an idea such as the ocean completely different. Whenever I do a workshop, I like to ask people, what do you think about when you think about the ocean? And the differences in responses that come across, whether that is in different languages or different point of view, is incredible. For some, it's an emotion. For some, it's excitement or seeing it teeming of life. For some, it's economic opportunity. For some, it's food. It is so many different things. So even coming together, just a group here, you know, I think there'll be so many different ways of really understanding the words or the things that we are talking about. And so I think it takes time, trust. It's all about relationships. So yeah, I can agree more. Sorry, Yoshi, go.
No. Thank you. So we got 3 minutes, and then I'm just going to go for 3 questions, but it's quite big. So one is, how can river and freshwater bodies help connect these inland population with the ocean? If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I thought that was a brilliant question, because I think often what is posed in some of my work and conversations that I have is, how do we reach children inland if we talk about, you know, the importance of the embodied or place-based experiences. And I think that we are all interconnected, and rivers is really a beautiful place of thinking of how we are interconnected and how we're kind of upstream or downstream. We are affected by how the ocean is or how the freshwater systems are. So I'm not an ecologist, and I don't know enough about the actual processes, but at the same time, what we're seeing through our work in estuaries and in river systems is that it's completely interdependent on the marine areas and the ocean, and particularly when it comes to spiritual connections, cultural heritage and identities, and customary practices. So I think it's such an important and a great way of thinking of how we are actually connected to the ocean, even if we're far inland.
Thank you. If I can add to it, it's not really positive, but the pollution is coming from freshwater big time, and it's just really scary things. Both mercury, PFAS, and especially those ones which bioaccumulated. It's really the scary things which actually matters, including plastic, although it's not bioaccumulated. So another one is, okay, how you think about exposure ocean water play out real times and really effective way of personalizing the ocean to the general public. That's tough. I don't know. Dr. Uku, do you want to say something?
Yes. One thing I am doing for Kenya is integrating ocean dialogues I'm not going to use the literacy, but ocean dialogues. Maybe that's the word I'll take going forward. In a marine spatial planning process, I lead the national process, and we are using this platform to begin turning Kenyan seaward. So as we have dialogues, we've begun having dialogues with the education sector to actually help them understand this big chunk of information they're missing in our curriculum. And for me, that's a big start. And we hope to integrate these dialogues as we go forward. And I think following up from Mia, one thing we find when we ask the question of how the ocean makes people feel, almost 50% feel fear. They can't imagine because of past experiences. So we have to recognize that maybe we are ocean blind because we feel fear. Those in leadership have had a bad experience, and there is fear. So how do we confront the fear and turn it around?
Interesting. And Dr. Scott asking, do you have any way you thought about mainstreaming ocean? Because it's always just a section and rather than the main thing. Okay, thank you, Emily. Do you have any idea? It's like, how do we mainstream? One of the things I wanted to share with everyone, because I live close to the Boston, it's almost done. And there is an exhibition in Fine Art Museum talking about like hidden history of Atlantic trade, which is also about the ocean, coloniality, enslavement, and then also sugar and our consumption. You know, there's artwork is also catching up, looking into the history, but really mainly into the modern, you know, relevance to the modern history. So, but maybe the last question from Dr. Scott, it'd be too huge, but so if you don't mind, I'm going to close it now. I'm just mindful, but thank you very much for the question, Dr. Scott. And the Dr. Strand and Dr. Uku, this has been a really great conversation. Thank you very much. And we hope to continue this conversation. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about your work in the future. And hopefully we have another dialogue on ocean literacies, and perhaps a different word which you create, Dr. Uku, through your process. I just want to thank you again. Thank you very much. And thanks for the organizers. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.